Public policy. Nigeria's years of military rule resulted in a top-down policy-making process. Power is concentrated in the presidency, and much outside input comes to the president and his cabinet ministers through channels established by patron clientelism. Senior government officials are supported by a broader base of loyal junior officers, creating a sort of loyalty pyramid. State control of resources means that those in the pyramid get the spoils, and they alone have access to wealth and influence. These loyal clients have had many nicknames, including the Kaduna Mafia, Babangida Boys, and Abacha's Boys. Since the military was in control until 1999, the pyramids are backed by guns, so that protesting the corruption could be dangerous. The system operated under the assumption that the military and political elite rule with only their self-interest in mind. Historically, this pattern of top-down, self-interested rule was put in place during colonial times when the British relied on native chiefs to ensure that Nigerian trade and resources benefited Great Britain. To break this pattern, political elites must get in touch with their older roots, the communalism from pre-colonial days. Democratic rule requires that political leaders are responsible for the welfare of their people, not only to those that they owe favors to. Economic issues. One result of the loyalty pyramids has been the squandering of Nigeria's wealth. Currently, the country finds itself deeply in debt, and most of its people live in poverty. Tremendous oil revenues have disappeared into the pockets of government officials, and most Nigerians have not profited from them at all. The situation is complicated by ethnic and regional hostilities and by widespread popular distrust of the government. In February 2001, the federal government asked the Supreme Court to allow the federal government to collect oil revenues and pool them into a federal account. On the surface, this appears to be revenue sharing, or allowing the entire country to benefit from offshore oil profits. However, the areas in the south along the Niger Delta protested the practice strongly, partly because they saw the policy as coming from northerners who wanted to take southern profits away. And without trust in the government, almost no one believed that the profits would benefit anyone except corrupt government officials. Oil, a source of strength or weakness? Like Iran, Nigeria is a rentier state. A rentier economy is heavily supported by state expenditure, while the state receives rent from other countries. Iran and Nigeria receive income by exporting their oil and leasing out oil fields to foreign companies. The state's main role in the economy is in controlling the nation's revenues and in spending those earnings, known as rents, which come mainly from oil. Individual groups and communities have learned to respond through rent-seeking behavior, primarily by competing for the government's largesse. Those that win the competition do so through political connections provided to the patron-client system, with the president having control over who gets what. Most Nigerians struggle along without much access and participate in the informal economy of unreported incomes from small-scale trade and subsistence agriculture. During the 1970s, Nigeria's oil wealth gave it a great deal of international leverage. As an active member of OPEC, Nigeria could make political and economic demands because developed countries needed its oil. Through the years, Nigeria has gained clout whenever Middle Eastern tensions have cut off oil supplies from that region, forcing developed countries to rely more heavily on Nigerian oil. However, Nigeria's over-reliance on oil has meant that the country's economy suffers disproportionately whenever oil prices go down. During eras of low oil prices, Nigeria has amassed great debt, partly because the profits do not remain in the state's coffers long enough to cover the lean years. An important issue is the fact that oil is being stolen at record rates, so that no one knows for sure what Nigeria's actual production is. The state-run Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation has often been judged one of the world's most corrupt oil companies. A joint report by Transparency International and the Revenue Watch Institute in New York recently claimed that the NNPC had the worst record of 44 national and foreign companies examined. An external audit said it was accountable to no one, and it has been called a slush fund for the government. A petroleum industry bill has been in the works for more than 15 years, intended to overhaul the industry, make it more transparent, and improve regulatory institutions and fiscal policies. However, the bill has yet to be passed. Another major issue since early 2006 has been the unstable situation in the Niger Delta regarding protests and subterfuge on foreign-based oil companies there. Some groups are idealistic, such as the Movement for the Emancipation of the Niger Delta, MEND, which wants more oil money going to the people of the Delta states. However, the group has chosen violent methods, such as kidnapping foreign oil workers, and others have joined in the mayhem, including gangs with no such communal goals. Mend has also siphoned oil illegally to sell it to refineries overseas, and gun running is believed to be a big source of the group's revenues. The violence was driven some companies away, such as Wilbur's, one of the world's largest independent contractors that left Nigeria in the summer of 2006. Other companies have cut production, so that by mid-2007, about a quarter of Nigeria's oil output has been shut down since January 2006. Dealing with this issue was one of the biggest challenges facing President Jonathan, and he made it one of his priorities. However, despite the army's attempt to contain the rebels, the violence continued. Yar'Adua created a dedicated ministry for the Niger Delta to oversee developments in 2008 and convened a committee to look for long-term solutions. The environmental impact of oil production in the Delta was the focus of a 2011 report from the United Nations, which declared that it could take 30 years and at least $41 billion to rid the mangroves of a thick carpet of crude oil. About the same time the report was released, Shell Oil admitted liability for the first time for two big leaks in the Delta, and the company paid out about $1.7 million in compensation to groups in the Delta affected by spills. In the north, an Islamist group called Ansaru kidnapped several foreign construction workers in the state of Bauchi. The kidnappings rattled foreigners working in the north, so that some companies have transferred family members of workers to the south. An increase in polio has been reported in Nigeria since a rebellion started by Boko Haram about 4 years ago, according to the World Health Organization. Polio vaccinators have been particular targets of the militant groups, with several health workers killed in early 2013. Despite these economic problems, Nigeria's economy is growing quickly, with an increase of 6.3% in 2014. The GDP is fast approaching that of South Africa, where growth is about 3% annually, so it is possible that Nigeria will become Africa's biggest economy within a decade. Structural adjustment. After international oil prices plummeted in the early 1980s, Nigeria was forced to turn to international organizations for help in managing its huge national debt. In 1985, the Babangida regime developed an economic structural adjustment program with the support of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The program sought to restructure and diversify the Nigerian economy so that it could decrease its dependence on oil. The government also pledged to reduce government spending and to privatize its parastatals. This shock treatment has had mixed results, but generally timelines for debt repayments have been restructured because Nigeria could not keep up with its payments. Parastatals are still under state control, and the private economic sector has not grown significantly. The large national debt remains a major problem for Nigeria today, especially as oil prices plummeted in 2008. By 2011, with oil prices once again higher, the challenge of using the oil-created wealth to benefit the country was still unmet. And with the drop of oil prices in 2014, the problems deepened. Recent reforms include a professionally managed sovereign wealth fund, replaced the current slush fund that was used by the government to give away more than $10 billion in the run-up to the 2011 elections. More Nigerians now have bank accounts, with more expected as mobile phone banking becomes more common over the next few years. The main goal of the most suggested reforms is to funnel oil revenues into a more efficient financial system that could provide capital to the private sector to build roads and power stations and expand private enterprises such as farming. Reactions to the global economic crisis of 2008. Nigeria's economy hasn't suffered as much as many others since the crisis of 2008, partly because the banking system improved significantly under an initiative during President Obasanjo's second term in office, 2003 to 2007. As part of a policy to squeeze weak or failing banks out of business, in 2005 the Central Bank of Nigeria raised banks' capital requirements, that is, the amount of money they must have on hand, so that the number of banks dropped from 89 to 24 by the end of the year. Another contributing factor in Nigeria's relatively stable economy was the fact that it had paid off sizable debts under the Structural Adjustment Program. However, the sharp decrease in the price of oil did a great deal of economic damage, including a devaluation of the currency, the naira. The Nigerian Stock Exchange also went into steep decline. Housing prices dropped, and a small amount of international tourism that Nigeria attracted virtually disappeared. Nigeria's inability to provide electric power has continued, with President Yar'Adua reversing Obasanjo's order to privatize power companies. President Jonathan has made increasing electricity supply a priority, and he put forward a privatization plan that aims to raise $35 billion of investment over the next decade, and stipulates that companies put money into electricity transmission. Under Jonathan's plan, Grid transmission remained in government hands but was privately managed. The aim was to triple supply by 2013. However, the scandal that caused his power minister to resign derailed that goal since it discouraged investment. Federal character. Federalism is seen by most Nigerians as a positive, desirable characteristic for their country. Federalism appeals to many countries because it promises that power will be shared and that all people in all parts of the country will be fairly represented. Federalism also allows citizens more contact points with the government so that true democratic rule can be more easily achieved. In Nigeria, the goal is to seek a federal character for the nation, a principle that recognizes people of all ethnicities, religions, and regions and takes their needs into account. The Nigerian Constitution has put many provisions in place to support the goal of federal character. For example, senators represent diverse states, representatives are elected from diverse districts, and the president must receive 25% of the vote in 2/3 of the region in order to be elected. However, so far this ethnic balancing has not promoted unity or nationalism, but has only served to divide the country more. One negative effect of federalism has been to bloat and promote corruption within the bureaucracy. Since all ethnicities must be represented, sometimes jobs have been created just to satisfy the demand. Once established within bureaucratic posts, these appointees see themselves as beholden to ethnic and regional interests. Another negative effect takes place within the legislative chambers. The 36 states vie for control of government resources and see themselves in competition with older ethnic groups for political and economic benefits. The federal character issue is based squarely on the fact that the national question in Nigeria remains unanswered. Do Nigerians have enough in common to remain together as a country? Many Southerners contend that true federalism will exist only when the central government devolves some of its power to the state and local levels. For example, Nigerians of the Niger Delta believe that regions should control their own resources. For them, that means that the federal government should not redistribute their region's oil revenues. Other Southerners have suggested that police duties and personnel should be relegated to local and state levels, as they are in the United States. Northerners generally don't support the true federalism movement because their regions historically have not had as many resources or as much revenue to share. Many northern states benefit more than Southerners from nationally sponsored redistribution programs. Democratization. Some changes have occurred in Nigeria since the last military regime left in 1999. For example, some public enterprises have been privatized, opening the way for limitations on the economic control of the central government. Also, a scheme for alleviating poverty has been set forward. Public wages have increased in recent years with the hope that well-paid public employees won't be as susceptible to bribery. Some of the money that General Abacha stashed in his foreign bank account now has been returned to the state treasury. Finally, Nigeria's financial reserves have grown partly because oil prices have been rising over the past few years. Despite all its problems, Nigeria shows some signs that democracy may be taking root in its presidential system, including these. Some checks and balances between government branches. The legislature rejected President Obasanjo's attempt to change the constitution to allow him to run for a third term in 2007, despite a great deal of pressure from the political elite. Some independent decisions in the courts. President Obasanjo's attempt to keep his vice president, Atiku Abubakar, from running for the president in 2007 were foiled by the courts after the president's allies used corruption charges to bar his candidacy. The Supreme Court ruled in Abubakar's favor, even though his name was not returned to the ballot until the last minute. The election tribunal set up to investigate allegations of electoral fraud were allowed to function under President Yar'Adwa's new administration, and some officials were actually removed from office through court order. Revival of civil society. Nigeria's many civic and religious groups driven underground by military rule have reactivated and freely criticized the government's handling of the 2007 election. They pushed for reform for the elections that followed with a fair degree of success. Independent media. During the 2007 elections, the media sent countless correspondents across 36 states to bring back reports of stuffed ballot boxes, intimidated voters, and phony results. Internet and cell phone connections allow poll observers, voters, and political parties to freely communicate, making it much more difficult to hide election fraud. The media watched the 2011 and 2015 elections carefully and reported irregularities. Peaceful succession of power. For the first time in Nigeria's history, power passed between two civilians as President Olusegun Obasanjo stepped down in 2007, peacefully allowing for Umaru Yar'Adua to take over. When Yar'Adua died in 2010, Goodluck Jonathan, as vice president, took over and acting president without any major problems. When Jonathan was defeated by Muhammadu Buhari in 2015, he conceded the election graciously, and Buhari took power without major resistance. Improving Freedom House scores. Freedom House, an organization that studies democracies around the world, ranks countries on a 1 to 7 freedom scale, with countries given a 1 being the most free, and those given a 7 being the least free. In 2015, Freedom House gave Nigeria a 4.5, putting it squarely in the partly free category. Nigeria's score has improved over the years, along with those of many other countries in Africa. In 1976, the vast majority, 25, including Nigeria, were not free. Today, the not free category has shrunk to 14 states, with most falling into the partly free category, including Nigeria. Are the recent reform indications that Nigeria may finally be stabilizing as a nation? In many ways, Nigeria's massive economic and political troubles are intertwined in such a fashion that it is difficult to tell where to start in unraveling the issues. Economic problems are rooted in patron clientelism, which in turn breeds corruption, which makes the economic problems more difficult to solve. Patron clientelism also has encouraged ethnic discord and has proved to be a major stumbling block to the development of a democracy. One of the key characteristics of a true democracy is the existence of regular competitive elections in which citizens have real choices of leaders. Recent Nigerian elections may be interpreted to support either an optimistic or pessimistic view for Nigeria's future prospects. On one hand, it is easy to criticize the Nigerian election process as a farce. After all, the election of 93 was annulled, and the election of 99 and 2003 only put a former military general back in power. The elections of 1999, 2003, and 2007 were also characterized by ballot box theft and stuffing. Several candidates were assassinated and ordinary people were killed in their efforts to vote. How can this be a democracy? On the other hand, 3 elections were held in a row without being suspended or annulled, and the election of 2011 and 2015 were hailed by most observers as a big improvement over the previous ones. Some argue that the most recent generation of presidential candidates consist of military men because they are the only ones with the experience necessary to govern. These hopeful ones point out that the last 2 presidents of Nigeria have not been military men, and predicts that younger, non-military leaders will emerge as political candidates in the near future. After all, the experience of democracy has deep roots in Nigerian political culture. Perhaps the best question is, was this election better than the last one? If so, perhaps a new, more optimistic pattern is developing in Nigeria.